The rain had been falling since early morning, turning the city streets into glistening mirrors that reflected the blur of passing headlights. Downtown, the Whitmore Art Gallery stood like a beacon of refinement, its tall glass facade glowing warmly against the gray sky, its marble steps slick with rainwater. 16-year-old Aaliyah Carter paused at the foot of those steps, adjusting the strap of the worn canvas tote slung over her shoulder. Inside was her sketchbook, thick with pages filled corner to corner in charcoal, pencil, and watercolor. Some pages were smudged, others bent at the corners, but each held hours of quiet work. She looked up at the glass doors, a nervous flutter rising in her stomach. Her hoodie was deep navy blue, speckled with faint paint stains that never quite washed out. Her jeans were faded and a bit too long, the cuffs damp from walking. But in her dark, curious eyes, there was a sharpness, a focus that made her seem older than her years. With one deep breath, she pushed through the doors. The shift from the rainy street to the gallery's interior was immediate. Warmth wrapped around her, accompanied by the faint, clean scent of polished wood and the soft hum of classical music floating through hidden speakers. The space was large and open, bathed in golden light from ceiling fixtures, designed to mimic natural daylight. Paintings hung in neat rows along pristine white walls. Each one was framed with painstaking precision, a small engraved plaque beneath naming the artist and the piece. A few sculptures stood like sentinels between the canvases, their shadows long on the polished floor. At the far end of the lobby stood Victoria Whitmore, the gallery's owner. Tall and elegant in a tailored charcoal gray dress, her blonde hair swept back into a sleek chignon, she exuded a kind of effortless authority. She was speaking in low, pleasant tones to a man in a tailored navy suit, both of them holding delicate crystal glasses filled with sparkling water. Aaliyah's sneakers squeaked softly on the marble as she approached the front desk where Victoria now stood. She waited politely until the conversation ended, then offered a small smile. "Excuse me," Aaliyah began, her voice steady but soft. "Could you tell me more about the artist who painted the landscape in the main room? The one with the sunset over the city skyline?" Victoria's eyes flicked to her for only a second, before returning to rearranging a stack of glossy exhibition brochures. "Everything you need to know is on the placard by the painting," she said smoothly, her tone polite but distant. "I saw the name," Aaliyah replied gently, "but I was curious about his technique, the way he blended the colors. I've never seen brushwork like that before." Victoria gave the faintest smile, the kind reserved for indulging a child. "We have guided tours for questions like that. They're at 2 o'clock on Saturdays. Until then, please enjoy browsing." The words were framed as an invitation, but the undertone made them sound like a dismissal. Aaliyah felt a faint heat in her cheeks, but she nodded. "Okay, thanks." She stepped away, her sneakers silent now on the polished floor, and began to wander through the nearest wing of the gallery. She moved slowly, her eyes drinking in every detail. The texture of thick oil paint under the light, the way colors shifted when viewed from different angles, the precise placement of each frame. The gallery was quiet except for the rain tapping faintly against the windows and the occasional echo of heels clicking on the floor. Somewhere nearby, Aaliyah caught a whiff of fresh lilies from a large floral arrangement. She flipped open her sketchbook and, without pausing to think, began making quick, light pencil strokes, capturing the rhythm of the brushwork in the painting before her. Though she had been brushed aside, she felt no bitterness, only a sharper determination. She was here to learn, whether anyone cared to teach her or not. The muted notes of a cello floated gently through the air as Aaliyah wandered deeper into the gallery, her sketchbook balanced against her forearm. She paused in front of a massive oil painting, an abstract swirl of crimson and gold, the colors layered so thickly they seemed to pulse under the light. Her pencil hovered above the page as she studied it, tilting her head to catch the way the brushstrokes overlapped like waves in motion. She bit her lip, considering, then turned back toward the front desk. Victoria was now alone, leafing through a leather-bound ledger and occasionally glancing toward the entrance, as though expecting someone more important to arrive. Aaliyah approached again, this time with more hesitation in her steps. "Sorry to bother you," she began, her voice respectful. "I was just wondering, do you know how the artist got that layered texture in the red and gold piece? I've read about palette knife techniques, but this feels different. Victoria didn't look up right away. When she did, her pale blue eyes swept over Aaliyah in a quick, assessing glance, from the paint-flecked hoodie to the scuffed sneakers. Her smile was practiced, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's one of our more exclusive works," she said, her tone almost sing-song but carrying an edge. "It's available for private purchase inquiries only." "Oh," Aaliyah's brow furrowed slightly. "I'm not looking to buy it, I just—" Victoria's voice grew slightly sharper, though still wrapped in politeness. "We generally save our more in-depth discussions for serious collectors, dear. If you're simply browsing, I suggest you enjoy the pieces and leave the technical matters to the professionals." Aaliyah froze for a second, the words landing heavier than she expected. "Leave the technical matters to the professionals." She blinked, forcing herself to keep her expression neutral. "I understand," she said quietly, and stepped back. From the corner of her eye, she saw Victoria's attention drift immediately toward a couple who had just walked in. A man in a camel trench coat and a woman in a silk scarf, both carrying the aura of wealth. Victoria's smile brightened, her voice warm and animated as she moved toward them, her heels clicking briskly against the marble. Aaliyah stood for a moment in the quiet wake of that exchange, the faint scent of lilies lingering around her. Then she turned back to the paintings, flipping to a blank page in her sketchbook. Her pencil began to move, quick, determined strokes, capturing the emotion she felt in that moment. The distance, the coldness, the unspoken message that she didn't belong here. But beneath the sting, something else stirred, a resolve. If she couldn't get her questions answered here, she would find her own answers. She would show them she belonged, even if they didn't believe it now. The cello music swelled faintly as she moved on, the rain outside tapping steadily against the glass. The gallery felt larger now, the space between her and the front desk stretching like an invisible barrier. But in her mind, she was already thinking ahead, to the competition, to her painting waiting quietly in storage, and to the night when she would stand in this very gallery again under very different circumstances. Aaliyah drifted away from the front desk, deeper into the quiet heart of the Whitmore Gallery, where the crowds thinned and the air felt stiller. Her footsteps echoed softly in the high-ceilinged hallway, lined with tall, rectangular panels of light that illuminated each painting like a shrine. She passed a seascape so vividly rendered that she could almost hear the waves, a portrait whose eyes seemed to follow her as she moved, and a minimalist piece, just a few sweeping lines, that somehow carried more emotion than 1,000 details could. Though the sting of Victoria's words lingered, Aaliyah found herself studying the art with even more focus than before. Her eyes darted from shadow to highlight, from texture to form. She noticed things others might miss. The almost imperceptible underpainting beneath the top layers, the subtle shifts of hue that gave life to otherwise flat colors. At one point, she stopped before a smaller painting tucked into a corner, partially obscured by a large sculpture of twisted bronze. It was easy to overlook, but Aaliyah was drawn to it instantly. The piece depicted an urban street at dusk, the buildings bathed in gold and violet light. In the lower right corner, a small child held a single balloon, the only bright red in the entire canvas. She opened her sketchbook and began to draw, not copying the piece exactly, but taking its essence and filtering it through her own vision. Her pencil danced quickly, layering lines and shapes, suggesting movement and emotion. As she worked, a thought pulsed quietly in the back of her mind. This is why I came here. Not for validation from someone like Victoria, but for moments like this, when art spoke directly to her, bypassing words entirely. From somewhere in the main hall, she heard the low murmur of Victoria's voice as she charmed another potential buyer. The sound only fueled Aaliyah's concentration. Every dismissive word, every sideways glance, every assumption made about her. She poured it all into her lines. When she finally paused to stretch her fingers, she caught her reflection in the protective glass of the nearest frame. She looked steady, focused, and older somehow, as if the act of pushing past someone else's judgment had aged her by years in a matter of minutes. She thought of her own painting, the one she'd submitted to the National Young Artists Competition months ago. It sat in the back of her mother's small apartment, carefully wrapped in brown paper and stored against the wall to protect it from sunlight. She'd titled it Roots of Tomorrow, and it was the most personal thing she'd ever created. A blend of her grandmother's old Mississippi garden and the concrete skyline of her city, a merging of past and future in vibrant, defiant color. The finalists for the competition would be announced soon, and she knew, deep down, that she had as much of a chance as anyone. But she also knew what winning could mean, not just for her, but for anyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong in places like this. Aaliyah slid her pencil back into the spiral binding of her sketchbook and closed it. Her face was calm, but inside, her mind was already on fire. She didn't need Victoria's approval. Because one day soon, the same woman who brushed her off would have no choice but to say her name aloud, in front of everyone. The rain that had hung over the city all week finally cleared on Friday afternoon, leaving the streets gleaming under a pale winter moon. By evening, the Whitmore Art Gallery glowed like a jewel box on the corner of Ashford Avenue and Ninth, its tall glass facade spilling warm light onto the sidewalk. Inside, the transformation was breathtaking. Gone was the quiet, half-empty calm Aaliyah had experienced days before. The air now hummed with the soft laughter of guests and the delicate chime of champagne glasses meeting in polite toasts. Gold-tinted spotlights cast every piece of art in flattering warmth, and low arrangements of white orchids and lilies sat on mirrored tables along the walls, their fragrance mingling with the faint scent of polished wood. Classical music drifted from a live string quartet tucked into one corner, the rich notes of a cello weaving between the lilting tones of a violin. Waiters in crisp black vests moved gracefully through the crowd, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres, tiny quiches, smoked salmon canapés, and chocolate-dipped strawberries that looked too perfect to eat. At the center of it all was Victoria Whitmore, dressed in a floor-length silver gown that caught the light like liquid metal. She moved from guest to guest with the ease of someone who had hosted events like this for decades, her smile flawless, her tone perfectly measured. Beside her, a small cluster of influential art critics and collectors hung on her every word. What Victoria didn't notice, at least not yet, was Aaliyah Carter slipping through the tall glass doors into the gallery. Aaliyah's appearance tonight was a world away from the paint-speckled hoodie and sneakers she'd worn before. Her hair was neatly braided and pulled into a soft bun at the nape of her neck. She wore a simple but elegant knee-length black dress, borrowed from her mother, and low black heels. The only color came from the silver pendant around her neck, a gift from her grandmother, who had once told her, "You carry your own light, no matter where you go." She clutched her small clutch bag in one hand and walked slowly, taking in the scene. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Tonight was not just any opening night. It was also the awards ceremony for the National Young Artists Competition, a highlight of the gallery's annual calendar. The 5 finalists' works had been mounted in the East Wing, each displayed under perfect lighting with a small plaque naming the piece and artist. Aaliyah's submission, Roots of Tomorrow, was there too, though few people yet knew that it belonged to her. She had entered the competition under the name A Carter, partly because it sounded more formal and partly because she wanted her work to be judged without assumptions. She wandered toward the East Wing, her steps measured, heart thudding in her chest. The crowd in this section was smaller, quieter, speaking in the hushed tones people use when they are in the presence of something delicate. Her painting hung near the center, surrounded by others that were technically impressive, but, to her eyes, lacked a certain pulse. She watched as a couple in evening attire stopped in front of her piece. The woman tilted her head, her eyes scanning the details. "It feels alive," she murmured to her companion. "Like it's telling me about something real." Her companion nodded. "It's unexpected. The city skyline feels modern, but the garden, it's like a memory. It's beautiful." Aaliyah felt a small, warm bloom in her chest. She didn't step forward to introduce herself. This wasn't the moment for that. Instead, she moved toward the back of the room, blending into the crowd. At precisely 8 p.m., a chime echoed through the gallery, calling guests to gather in the main hall. The lights dimmed slightly, and a raised stage with a single microphone became the focal point. The evening's host, an older gentleman in a tuxedo, stepped forward with a practiced smile. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight at the Whitmore Gallery's annual opening. We are honored to also host the final stage of the National Young Artists Competition, a celebration of emerging talent from across the country. Our 5 finalists have brought us work that challenges, inspires, and delights. Applause rippled through the room. Aaliyah stood near the back, her palms damp, her eyes fixed on the stage. Beside the host stood Victoria, still glowing under the lights, unaware that the girl she'd dismissed earlier in the week was standing only a few feet away, about to take the spotlight in a way she could never have predicted. The soft murmur of the crowd faded as the host stepped closer to the microphone, unfolding a cream-colored envelope with deliberate slowness. The silver light from above caught the paper as it moved, and the faint sound of its crackle seemed louder than it should have been. "Tonight," the host began, his warm baritone carrying easily across the hall, "we celebrate not only the opening of a new season for the Whitmore Gallery, but the next generation of artists who will shape the future of our cultural landscape." He gestured toward the East Wing. For months, our judges reviewed hundreds of submissions from across the nation, painters, sculptors, and mixed media visionaries, each pouring heart and soul into their work. After careful consideration, we selected 5 remarkable finalists, whose pieces are on display this evening for you to enjoy. Soft applause broke out, polite but charged with expectation. Guests turned their heads toward the East Wing, a few even drifting slightly to catch another glimpse of the finalists' work. Victoria Whitmore stood proudly near the front, her smile fixed and gracious as she acknowledged the applause with a small nod. Her eyes gleamed as she scanned the crowd, no doubt imagining which young artist's career she might claim to have discovered tonight. The host lifted the envelope again. And now, the moment we've been waiting for. The winner of this year's National Young Artists Competition, recipient of a $10,000 scholarship, a featured spot in an upcoming Whitmore Gallery exhibition, and the title of National Young Artist of the Year, goes to a pause. The room held its breath. A Carter for Roots of Tomorrow. The applause came first as a wave of polite clapping, then swelled into something warmer, genuine. Heads turned, scanning for the mysterious A. Carter. A few guests whispered to one another, clearly impressed by the winning piece they had seen earlier. Victoria's smile faltered just slightly. The name meant nothing to her. Not one of the students she'd been personally introduced to earlier in the evening, not anyone from the right programs. She clapped nonetheless, though a faint crease formed between her brows. From the back of the crowd, Aaliyah felt her stomach leap into her throat. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She took one deep breath, then stepped forward. The crowd parted slowly, people turning to see the young woman making her way toward the stage. The silver pendant at her throat caught the light. The simple black dress moved softly around her as she walked, head held high. It was only when she was halfway to the stage that Victoria's eyes widened ever so slightly. She recognized her now, the girl in the paint-flecked hoodie from earlier in the week, the one she had brushed off without a second thought. Aaliyah reached the stage steps, where the host extended a hand to help her up. "Congratulations, Ms. Carter," he said warmly into the microphone as she joined him. He turned her toward the crowd, which greeted her with another round of applause. "Would you like to say a few words?" he asked, passing her the microphone. Aaliyah hesitated for only a moment before taking it. Her voice was steady, though her pulse was still racing. "Thank you. This painting, Roots of Tomorrow, is about where we come from and where we're going. It's about the strength we inherit from those before us, and the dreams we plant for those who come after." Her eyes swept briefly over the crowd, landing, just for a heartbeat, on Victoria. Art is for everyone. It doesn't matter where you start or what people think you're capable of. What matters is the work you put in, the truth you put on the canvas. The applause that followed was louder, richer, more personal, the kind that comes from people who've just felt something real. Victoria clapped too, but her hands felt strangely heavy. The realization had begun to sink in, and with it, an uncomfortable twist in her chest. As the applause washed over the room, Victoria's smile stayed in place, but her mind was spinning. She had spent her career cultivating an image of the Whitmore Gallery as a bastion of refinement, sophistication, and exclusivity. Yet here she was, watching the young woman she had so casually dismissed stand on her stage, receiving an award that would be remembered for years. The girl, no, the artist, spoke with quiet confidence, her voice carrying a weight that belied her youth. Every word Aliyah said seemed to land somewhere deep in the crowd. Even the critics, those notoriously hard to impress, were leaning forward, nodding thoughtfully. Victoria felt a flush rising up her neck, the warmth creeping under her collar. She remembered the exact moment just days ago. The hoodie, the scuffed sneakers, the earnest questions about palette knives and layered textures. She had barely made eye contact. She'd been polite, at least by her own measure, but she knew the truth. She hadn't seen her. Not really. Now the irony was impossible to ignore. That same young woman had produced the most talked about painting of the night. The same young woman had managed to capture in one canvas something that no amount of wealth or prestige could buy: raw authenticity. The host placed a framed certificate and a check in Aliyah's hands, along with the heavy circular medal on a deep blue ribbon. The audience's applause faded into conversation again as guests began mingling once more, some making their way toward the East Wing to admire the winning piece. Victoria lingered where she stood, unsure whether to approach Aliyah immediately or wait until the crowd thinned. Around her, she caught snippets of conversation. Such emotion in her work. Have you seen it up close? And she's so young. Imagine what she'll be doing in 10 years. The Whitmore Gallery has really outdone itself this year, showcasing her. That last comment made Victoria's stomach twist. Showcasing her. She hadn't done that at all, at least not intentionally. If anything, she had almost made the gallery a place that pushed her away. Across the room, Aliyah was surrounded by well-wishers, other artists, patrons, even one of the judges, shaking her hand and asking her about her process. Her smile was genuine but measured, as if she was taking it all in while still keeping a piece of herself protected. Victoria watched her for a long moment before finally gathering the courage to move toward her. She felt the strange weight of the night settling on her shoulders, the awareness that she was about to face someone she had underestimated and, in doing so, had revealed something about herself she didn't particularly like. As she approached, the sound of the string quartet swelled again, filling the space with a soft, almost cinematic backdrop. The guests seemed to part naturally, giving her a clear path to the young artist at the center of the evening's attention. Aliyah turned just as Victoria reached her. Their eyes met, and in that instant, Victoria felt an unspoken understanding pass between them. I remember you. And Victoria knew she couldn't undo the past. But maybe, just maybe, she could begin to address it. Victoria stopped to step away from Aliyah, suddenly aware of how loud her own heartbeat sounded in her ears. Up close, the young woman's, presence felt different than it had days ago. She wasn't just a visitor anymore. She was the centerpiece of the night, the artist whose work had everyone talking. Aliyah, Carter, is it? Victoria began, her voice low as though the words themselves were difficult to push out. Aliyah's gaze was steady, her expression polite but unreadable. Yes, she replied simply. Victoria glanced briefly at the people lingering nearby, then back at Aliyah. She hesitated, and for a moment her polished, society-perfect composure cracked. I believe we've met before. Earlier this week. I remember, Aliyah said, her tone neutral, but there was the faintest flicker in her eyes, a mix of acknowledgement and something else, something that told Victoria that yes, she knew exactly what had happened and how it had felt. I owe you an apology, Victoria said finally, her voice quieter now. When you came in the other day, I misjudged you. I was wrong to dismiss your questions. I can see now that your passion and talent are remarkable, and I should have welcomed that instead of what I did. For a moment, Aliyah didn't respond. The hum of the crowd filled the silence between them. The smell of lilies from a nearby table drifted in the air. Somewhere across the room, champagne glasses clinked. Then Aliyah offered a small smile. Not warm exactly, but not cold either. I appreciate that, she said. But honestly, you don't need to tell me I belong here. I already knew. The words landed softly but firmly, carrying more weight than any lecture could. Victoria nodded slowly. You're right, she admitted. but I still needed to hear it from you. The two women stood there for a moment longer, the distance between them bridged, if only slightly. Aaliyah was soon swept away again by well-wishers and admirers, her laughter mingling with the music. Victoria watched her go, the metal glinting at her neck, the silver pendant catching the light with every movement. As she turned back toward the main hall, Victoria felt something she hadn't expected. Not just embarrassment or regret, but a quiet conviction. She thought of the gallery she had built, its reputation, its exclusivity. She realized that prestige without openness was nothing more than a locked door. Later that night, after the last guests had left and the orchids were beginning to close under the dimmed lights, Victoria stood alone in the East Wing. She faced Roots of Tomorrow, the painting that had shifted something in her. The city skyline merged into the lush garden, the deep roots weaving into the concrete, defying the separation between worlds. She knew she would remember this night for the rest of her career, not as the evening she hosted another successful opening, but as the night she learned, truly learned, that art wasn't just about walls and frames and who could afford to be inside them. It was about the people who carried their own light through the door, whether you noticed them or not.